Hello, everyone. Yeah, just really lovely to be here with everyone. Just echoing and booming out into the Sheffield Centre. Yeah, so really warm welcome, really lovely. Yeah, I hope you're enjoying your Sangha Night, and I hope you enjoy the talk. So I'll recap a little bit just to start with on where we are in our current theme. So the theme is the wheel, the spiral, and the goal. So first we looked at the wheel, which is our life as we normally live it, samsara, what we call samsara, so our normally lived life, that's the wheel. And then we looked at the spiral path, the path that can like lead us out of that trap, out towards enlightenment. And now we're on the theme of looking at the goal, so we're looking at enlightenment itself. So we're looking more closely at the goal, and we're using symbolism. So we're looking at symbols that point towards the goal. So at the moment, particularly in the form of the 5 jhinas or the 5 Buddha mandala. So this mandala, so the mandala's here, and this mandala is a way of using symbolism to help us to approach the goal in a bit more of a personal way. So the Buddhas in this mandala, they're archetypal symbols, and each one is a symbol of an aspect of enlightenment. So we can think of each Buddha as being a particular doorway into awakening. Ultimately, they all lead towards enlightenment itself. But each Buddha in the mandala, each of the separate Buddhas, they emphasize a different face or a different aspect of enlightenment. So they can make enlightenment a bit more approachable for us personally, so that's why we would use these kind of symbols. So in the past few weeks, we've met 3 of these Buddhas on the mandala already. So Satyajoti talked about Amoghasiddhi, the green Buddha in the north. So on this picture, this is the north, so it's sort of turned around. So the green Buddha, Amoghasiddhi, the green Buddha of the north, who symbolizes fearlessness. Amoghasiddhi symbolizes fearlessness. And Prajnahridaya has looked at Amitabha in the west, the red Buddha in the west, and he's the red Buddha of infinite light and love, Amitabha. And then last week, Sangha Gita. Is it scratching?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Told Emma to tell me if the mic starts to scratch, so tell me if it does it again. Thanks, Emma. Sangha Gita last week talked about Ratnasambhava, the Buddha of extreme giving, generosity. Okay, so this week I'll be looking at Akshobya, the blue Buddha who sits at the east of the mandala. So there he is on the east of the mandala. And I'm just going to say like a little bit about using the mandala as practice and how we can do that. So these Buddhas are symbols, they're representations, and they're not historical figures. And they point towards something transcendent. So they symbolize something transcendent. Thank you. So they point towards a vast perspective. And some people have a natural feel for symbolism in that way and just really get that, and other people don't. So you don't have to be really into this kind of stuff in order to have an effective, committed Buddhist practice. So it's not necessary for our practice. But I would encourage you to be open-minded and just give this stuff a go. So as well as being symbols of something higher, they can be a practical method of practice. They can be very practical. So they can have, as part of our practice, they can have an effect on us and bring about personal transformation and growth. Just like if you're looking at something that's beautiful, it can bring joy and ease and perspective. So they can be thought of in that way as a practice. Thank you. Got a frog in my throat. Hope you can hear what I'm saying. Okay, so here's the mandala. And it can be seen as having 2 distinct axes. So we've got the east-west axis this way, and we've got the north-south axis this way. And we can think of the east-west axis that we're talking about tonight with these two contrasting Buddhas. They can be seen as representing the more feeling aspects of enlightenment, the sort of inner world, the feeling aspects. And the north-south axis is more about the activity in the world, how that expresses in the world. So Akshobya, the focus of this week's talk. I'll show a picture of Akshobya. So there he is, blue Buddha. So Akshobya is associated with wisdom. He's the wisdom Buddha on the mandala. So this image communicates clarity and wisdom. And it's wisdom with a vast perspective. It's transcendent wisdom. So you notice his colour. I was just noticing the shrine is beautiful. Just noticing the blue on the shrine. So this colour, this dark blue, it's a cool, calm, clear, dark blue, compared to the warm red of Amitabha, who sits opposite him on the mandala. And his time of day is dawn. So at dawn, the air is cool and the sky is clear and vast, very clear. So this dark blue colour, the colour of the dawn sky, it's just as the sky turns from black at that dawn, when it's just turning from black into blue. So that's the colour of the dawn sky. And that's his colour. So this colour is cool. And it represents, as a symbol, it represents absolute equanimity of his vastness of vision. But it's a cool colour, but it's not cold. So wisdom is never cold. We don't have cold wisdom. It's not disengaged in that way, because wisdom, by its nature, is always about warmth. It's always about connection and metta. But this colour just symbolises the vastness and the clarity of that kind of wisdom. So all these Buddhas have particular ways into enlightenment, and the whole mandala represents all the facets. And the colour represents this particular aspect, this wisdom aspect, clear blue. So that's his colour. And his symbol is the Vajra. So this is the Vajra. So he holds a Vajra in his left hand. And we've got a Vajra on the shrine, and I was looking for a Vajra, and I thought it was like this little tiny one, and I was like, I'll show everybody a Vajra. This one's a bit small. But I've got this big one on the shrine. So this is the Vajra. So you can come up afterwards and have a little look at this, and maybe like just feel it, hold it to it, have a little hold of that. That's on the shrine. So that's the Vajra. Yeah, a picture of the Vajra as well. There we go, there's the Vajra. So the Vajra is a really complex symbol. I'll just say a few things about it, about the meaning and the symbolism here. So the Vajra is also known as the diamond thunderbolt. The diamond thunderbolt. So diamond is clear and pure and untarnished. And it's of unbreakable strength. And the thunderbolt is pure and bright. It's almost blinding energy and clarity, and it has the potential to destroy anything in its path, the thunderbolt. So it's just got such strength and potential for change in this symbol, the Vajra, the diamond thunderbolt. It is said it can break through any obstacle to awakening. So it breaks through obstacles. And I think the Vajra, it can represent a particular approach to practice, a particular approach to move towards enlightenment. And so we can think of spiritual practice, we can think of it as a gradual path, a gradual process of growth, like the growth of a plant, regular steps. And in Buddhism, That is symbolised by the lotus, by Amitabha on the opposite axis of the mandala. And in contrast, Akshobya has the Vajra. So this symbolises a very different approach to enlightenment. It's an approach of breaking through and smashing through obstacles, directly breaking through anything that stands in our way, that limits us. Anything that limits us, the Vajra breaks through it. And I think in practice, we probably need both approaches and maybe different approaches at different times. But I think it's really good to recognise your strengths and your tendencies. So just like notice if you're inspired by either of those symbols, the Vajra approach or the lotus approach. So the lotus associated with a more gentler, gradual, steady kind of development, and the Vajra associated with like sudden shifts, breaking through, kind of like a harder cutting edge of practice, that type of practice. So all the Buddhas have a mudra, a hand gesture, and Akshobya's hand gesture is touching the earth. He's touching the earth with his right hand, like the Buddha that we have here. So this is a powerful evocation of stability, real stability, confidence, groundedness. And his name, Akshobya, means the immovable. He's the immovable, he's the unshakable. He cannot be moved, he cannot be shaken. He represents absolute equanimity and groundedness. So you could just try that mudra now, if you feel like it, maybe just like close your eyes, just touch the earth. And just notice, does that have any effect? Just sit and feel, does that have any effect in your body, in your mind? Just interesting to notice, does that have any effect on emotions, thoughts? So that's his mudra. And each of these Buddhas, they have what we traditionally call a poison. Or an affliction, you could say it's an affliction, something that's in the way, and a poison. And each Buddha transforms a poison, a particular poison, into a wisdom, and into a particular aspect of enlightenment. So Akshobya's poison is the poison of hatred. So he transforms hatred. So hatred is a really strong word, and we probably don't like it. We don't like that word. But maybe, like if we're really aware and if we're really honest, we might be able to say that actually, yes, sometimes we feel quite strong hatred. It's hard to admit it, but maybe we do. So his poison is hatred. And it's also, so the word hatred is the traditional word for the poison that Akshobya transforms. But it also means any form of aversion. So the word hatred in this context, it includes everything like ill will, any form of ill will. So things like irritability, bit of irritability, in a traditional way we would call that hatred, as in greed, hatred and delusion in Buddhism. So things like irritability, any kind of criticism of other people or yourself, like having a bit of a critical nature, that's a form of hatred in this context. Any judgment of other people, any kind of like, you know, they really should be doing it differently, I'm a bit judgmental about that. Even any sort of dissatisfaction comes under this heading of hatred. And even other emotions like fear, any kind of fear is a form of aversion and hatred in this traditional sense. And even anxiety, so states of anxiety, comes under this heading in Akshobya. Akshobya can transform things like that, anxiety and fear. So what does it transform it into? So he transforms hatred into what we call the mirror-like wisdom. So that's why we've got the mirrors on the shrine. So the mirror-like wisdom. He transforms hatred into mirror-like wisdom. So what is mirror-like wisdom? What does that mean? Well, Akshobya, he sees things as they really are. So a mirror shows things as they are. A mirror shows things without distortion, so without any distortion and without any interpretation. So there's no distortion or interpretation when you look in a mirror. It just reflects as things are. So a mirror doesn't distort and it doesn't interpret. It just reflects what's there. And also, a mirror doesn't pick or choose. It doesn't pick or choose which bits it's going to reflect. So what you see in the mirror is impartial. It's objective. So this mirror-like wisdom is seeing without distortion and seeing impartially. Is also another image that can be quite helpful to some people is associated with still, deep water. So another way of sort of connecting with that mirror-like wisdom is to imagine like a deep, still lake surrounded by mountains. And the mountains are reflected in the surface of the lake completely clearly, just as they are, without distortion, completely impartially. So that can be quite a helpful, beautiful image. So he sees things as they really are. Things as they really are. So what does that mean? Well, he sees that everything is conditioned. So as we remember from the beginner's course and the intermediate course, all things are impermanent, all things are interconnected, unfixed, insubstantial, ever-changing. That's the way that all things are, ever-changing, rising and falling according to conditions. That's how things really are. So Akshobya sees that. He sees things as they really truly are. And generally we don't, so we usually see things coloured by our lens of like a deluded personal interpretation. So we see things as fairly solid and fixed, and we see ourselves as fairly separate to that. So we fix things, we perceive ourselves as separate to things, and then we want those things to be kind of how we want them to be. We want to be permanently satisfied by those things that were fixed. And things are not permanently how we want them to be, of course, because we don't have that kind of control. We all want different things anyway. So it just can't work out that way. So it doesn't work out seeing things that way. We just create this big dukkha all the time. And Akshobya doesn't do all of that. So he doesn't do any of that creating of dukkha. He doesn't create dukkha in that way because he sees things with wisdom. He sees things as they really are, the true nature of things, and he doesn't hold himself separately to that. And he's not in conflict with it. That's why he's immovable. That's why he's unshakable. He's not in conflict with how things really are. So that is Kshanti. That's his quality. He has this quality of Kshanti, patience, patient forbearance with the way that things really are. So in that example, we can see that Kshanti and patience in this way, it's not about being a martyr or just putting up with anything. It's really truly seeing how things are. And that acceptance is based on that clear transcendent wisdom, knowing how it is. Okay, so traditionally, there's a personality type associated with each of these Buddhas. So in reality, things are not so black and white, really. We'll all have some qualities from each of the Buddhas on the mandala. But it can be really helpful, I think, to focus in on certain aspects of our own personality and certain ways that we practice. And that can help us to kind of home in on our inspiration and our own motivation for practice and where we can be really effective. So Akshobya, he's associated with certain personality types. personality types with tendencies of ill will, aversion. So tendencies towards aversion in our personality. So there's an association here with a criticizing, critical, judging mind and clear wisdom. So there's an association with that personality type. So if we have aspects to our own personality, like prioritizing truth and straight talking over harmony, maybe we prefer just getting to the point, straightforward talking, more than we care about like keeping the peace or being harmonious. Maybe we can recognize that in our personality. Or valuing clarity and precision over spontaneity and creativity. Maybe we tend towards that. Clarity, precision, rather than spontaneity and creativity. And maybe we have a really strong reaction, maybe like a really strong dislike of any woolliness or vagueness or untruth. Maybe that really bothers us. And maybe we have like a very willful determination to get things done. I can see people smiling in the audience. Okay, so if you recognize any of that, maybe you're an Akshobya type. And it's really important to say as well, like there's nothing wrong or bad about any of those things in our personality type. We're all very complex, we're all conditioned. And when we meet the Dharma, when we're practicing and when we continue practicing, then we are where we are and we're working with whatever we're working with. And the real key to success is to get to know ourselves and get to know our tendencies and get to know our personalities honestly and without judgment, so that we can just work really effectively at growth and transformation. So without judgment, we've got what we've got and we are where we are. So yeah, so if you recognize that any of those personality traits in yourself, you may find or feel that you have an affinity with Akshobya. I certainly do recognize some of those traits. So yeah, so what we're really talking about is aversion in the mind, aversion, ill will. So how do we work? How can we work with that kind of, those kind of tendencies in ourselves and in our mind? I think one thing to really realize is that hatred and aversion, when they arise, when they happen, they come through experiences of suffering. They come through dukkha. You know, we don't hate when we're happy and at ease. So maybe underneath the hatred, there may be some fear. There may be some fear. And one thing that can help when we're in those states of aversion or criticism or judgment, maybe we can come out of the judging, thinking mind, and maybe we can come down into the body and into the heart and develop awareness. Just noticing, being aware of and noticing any critical thinking that we're doing in our mind. And try to consciously just rest in awareness in the body and especially in the heart area. I think it's a really important part of practice, aspect of practice for Akshobya kind of Vajra type of practitioners, that we really work at developing self-compassion and especially metta, self-metta. Because us Akshobya types, we can be very judgmental, we can be judgmental and critical of ourselves as well as other people, especially ourselves, and we have very high expectations. Yeah, so my experience of practice has definitely been this kind of like Vajra approach, Vajra way. And I think how it works, like when we meet the Dharma, we've got a lot of things that are just covering up our ability to see things as they are. This is what we're working with. We've got things that are in the way, things that are covering up our ability to really see reality. So we've got all sorts of stuff. We've got habits, we've got strategies, we've got a lot of unawareness, we've got distraction. These things get in the way, they stop us from clearly seeing the reality of things. And the Vajra way is that in that process of developing more awareness around all of that stuff, there can be a kind of sudden shattering and breaking through of some elements of those things. It can be quite sudden. It can be a breaking or a shattering of elements. So my experience has often been that way. And when I met the Dharma, I had very strong Akshobya traits. So things like an intellectual reliance that keeps me quite aloof from other people because I'm sure and I'm really certain I know what I'm doing, that kind of approach. And like an emotional reticence and self-reliance. I'm all right, I can do it. I'm fine by myself over here. And that protects from people getting close, stops people getting too close, don't need to let myself be vulnerable, those kind of things. And also a really courageous and really willful determination to bring all adversity onto the path and use it for transformation and progress. So there's so much positive energy in this kind of approach. And these kind of things, I think they can really say like, oh yeah, that is the Vajra type. That's the Vajra type of practice. So this approach, this Vajra way, it can bring about really sudden shifts. And just to say that, like in my experience, that can be quite unsettling. It can be quite unsettling. It can even be quite shattering. Maybe painful on some level. And it can leave us feeling a bit vulnerable, a little bit unsure, maybe confused even, like maybe something's going on, we don't quite know what. It can be quite confusing. So it's really important to develop spiritual friendship in this context. So like spiritual friendship and the Sangha, really, really crucial. So if you're a Vajra type, it's really important to develop spiritual friendship. And if you're a Vajra type and anything like me, you probably won't want to. But it's really important to do it. Yeah. So on the Vajra path, in this kind of approach, we can just see this small sense of ourselves from quite suddenly sometimes from a bigger perspective. We see these limitations, vulnerabilities of this old self, all these old habits. And there can be this shattering, like a shattering of parts of that old self. And it can open into something quite raw, maybe something quite striking, sort of possibility and potential in line with the Dharma and the precepts. You know, a real affinity, a real resonance with what enlightenment could be. And we can often have these experiences on retreat. You know, we see this on retreat, and this can be really where it happens. And this is kind of like a real Vajra approach. Yeah. So I recognize this stuff. So I've always really been up for that kind of intensity of practice. And maybe you are too if you recognize these kind of Akshobya. You might be an Akshobya type if you recognize this real sort of Vajra approach. Okay, so I've got a few that's the end of the main talk, and I've got a few suggestions for things like maybe some homework, things that we can bring into our practice this week. So some things that we can take away from the talk really, and maybe like put into practice. We can try them out or explore them a little bit. And also this could be like ideas for things that we can talk about in the group as well, like we can really explore that in the group. So first of all, like this colour blue, maybe we can maybe just give some time to that in the week. Just like just noticing really, just bring some awareness to it. Like if you see the colour blue, this particular kind of dark, clear blue, just give it a bit of time, maybe. Just stop and see. Don't just rush past, right? Does that, giving that a little bit of time, maybe absorbing it. Does it have any effect? What does that do, if anything? So just to be open really to the colour. What happens when you notice the colour blue? Are you drawn to it? Do you not like it? What happens there? And a mantra. So Akshobya has a mantra. And we're going to learn and chant the mantra this evening before we meditate. So we're going to learn it and we'll practice it. And we'll chant it together before we meditate later on. So maybe during the week, maybe just we could recite the mantra to ourselves, maybe just like internally, quietly, silently to ourselves, or maybe out loud, like when we're driving or out on a walk or when we're alone. And just maybe notice, does that have any effect? What effect does that have? How do you feel about that mantra? Does it do anything? And the mudra as well, so the earth touching mudra. We could do that. Maybe we could try that before we meditate. So maybe like when we sit ourselves down on our stool, maybe just touch the earth. Does that help? Does that change anything? Does that have any effect? And or we could do it after meditation, we can do it, and we can do it whenever. So maybe we could take up, one suggestion, something I did on an urban retreat, was I took up the earth touching mudra as an actual practice for a week, and I did it. I just decided to do that 5 times a day, and I set a reminder on my phone to do it. And I just left the house. I went outside and actually physically touched the earth. It had a very strong effect on me, particularly on something that I was working with at the time. So it's just what I'd just said, be open-minded, give it a try, see what happens. Does it have any effect? Maybe take that on as a practice. And then the last suggestion is a bit more complex. So it's really about finding the gap when we're working with any form of aversion in the mind. So the first thing is to is to just really notice it. It takes quite a lot of mindfulness to notice that and not just move over it, because actually we don't really like it, so we tend to not want to sort of be aware of it. We tend to want to not know that we're feeling that. So maybe really clocking it this week sometime when you're experiencing some aversion. So things like irritation, judgment, criticism. Maybe just stop if you can and take some time, look directly at what is happening in your inner world when that's going on, if you can create some space around it. So what you can look at is things like the body. So where do you experience that physically in the body? And look at that. Where is it? Where do you experience it? Where is it? What does it feel like? Is it fixed? Is it changing? And stay with that and see what happens. And notice any thoughts that go with it. So stories, narrative, thoughts. Looking for all the storylines around it. Especially things like shoulds. They should, I should, they shouldn't. That's forms of aversion. Think any sort of thoughts of judgment, criticism, any opinions, things like, they're lazy, that's not fair, they shouldn't be doing that. Any of those things, just noticing, no judgment, but just noticing, oh, I'm thinking that, do I think that? And stay with the thoughts, have a look, do I think that? And when you notice the thoughts, then we can ask ourselves, like, is that opinion, is it mirror-like seeing? Is it complete and absolute? Is it impartial? Is it clear? Is it objective? Or is it just your perspective? Is it partial? Is it personal? And just really reflect on that, like, and what happens when you do that kind of reflection on those kinds of thought tendencies? So just seeing what happens really through staying with that kind of awareness and exploration, being really curious, and especially being really kind to yourself, because, you know, self-judgment is still a form of aversion. So it's just another form of aversion. Yeah. Okay, so that's a few suggestions we can talk about in the groups and maybe try out this week. So the colour blue, noticing the colour blue, maybe doing the mantra, the mudra, and then this awareness of aversion in the body, in the thoughts, in the emotions. Okay, so there's a few ways of maybe bringing Akshobya into your week. Yeah, and maybe that will bring us some unshakability to our week in our, whatever the week holds for us, ever-changing conditions. Okay, so now we